This is going to be a video about carabiners, specifically which carabiners to use where and when and in what situations. So this is not specifically in reference to brands of carabiners or specific types, even though there are some that I like more than others. It's more or less just like why you might use this shape, or you might use this locking mechanism, or X, Y, or Z. But we'll get started. So I'm going to go through all these, going to try and be quick about it while still being thorough. So start with this one we got here. This is a camp photon wire, and they're nice because they're very light. So I use these on my trad gear. So my cams specifically are all racked on photon wires, and I color coordinate them to the sling of the cam. This just makes it easier when you're on your harness. You can just pop them off. You know exactly which piece is which. Next is carabiners that you would use on a belay device where the blocking carabiner is in contact with the rope. So the attachment carabiner is in contact with the rope. I would recommend a round stock carabiner. There's going to be a little bit of verbiage in this. There's going to be a little bit of a vocabulary that might be kind of weird. There's another carabiner video where I go into it in depth. But this one just has a very round profile, cylindrical all the way around, and that means the rope feeds very smoothly over it. This is also nice for a device that uses two ropes, because that means that this basket here more or less evenly experiences wear, as opposed to something like an offset D, or if you're using this while belaying with two ropes or rappelling, you would be primarily wearing one side over the other because of the geometry of the carabiner. If this is a guide device, so if this is a plate style device that you can use to bring up your second, I would say have the round stock carabiner there, because it'll keep you from having to struggle when you're pulling slack through. Then you just have another lightweight carabiner like this Edelrid Pure Screw into the top, because again, this is full strength. You can hang it off the anchor, and it doesn't weigh much. This one's kind of heavy, so you're trying to catch up on gained weight with the lightweight attachment biner. Next is a belay carabiner. A carabiner that you're using to belay that does not come in contact with the rope. So on a gree-gree, the rope feeds through here, and is never touching the carabiner, or if it is, it's just touching the top side there. The carabiner itself is not experiencing any wear by way of the rope. So I would choose a offset D, and I would make it lightweight for the reason that if you're going to be carrying this up multiple pitches of something, it's nice to save weight when you can. There's always the possibility and the increased benefits of taking something like an HMS, because that means it's more versatile. You can do things like a munter hitch off of it that you wouldn't be able to do on an offset D. But especially for like sport, just like at a sport crag, I would use a small little offset D like this. I wouldn't necessarily go to the trouble of buying a belay carabiner, like one with a little gate. That's up to that's a personal decision, but for me, that does not seem necessary. So I just use this little DMM Phantom, because I also really like the way it matches the color of the gree-gree, but that's just me. On to now a belay device that only uses one rope, or if you're only using one rope at a time to belay or rappel on, if you're doing blocked rappels, something like this Pilot you can use with a D-shaped carabiner, and all of the wear will be experienced by the single point on the carabiner. So I'm going to see if I can demonstrate it here real quick. The rope will be along the same portion of the carabiner the whole way. So you can see the rope is wearing right here all the while. So you're not worried about mismatched friction introduced into your rappel if you're rappelling, because you're only going down on the one rope. So Ds or offset Ds can be nice for devices where you're only using one rope at a time and there's still contact with the rope. So like this one as opposed to this one, even though they're both D-shaped, and this is offset D, it has a very round profile on it and on the top, so you can still pay out sight very smoothly. Rope does not argue with it, but you don't have to go to the trouble of having like an HMS beaner. Again, just another option. Next is personal anchor carabiners. So this is just on a Purcell Prusik, but this can be on like a personal anchor sling or personal anchor system or a Petzl Connect, anything. I really prefer to have an auto-locking carabiner just because it's a pretty essential, like there are times when you're trusting this and solely this. Maybe you have a backup or maybe there are redundancies, but there are certainly cases in which in an effort to save time and be realistic, and there are certainly times that you trust just your personal anchor, which you should, because it's substantially strong enough to hold you. But this, I just use this little Tau wire gate. It's got a combination of that little wire gate on the back and this one up front. It has a very, very pronounced small basket so that it will seldom load itself differently. So it would be very difficult, or at least more difficult than for it to flip itself upside down if I was using something like an oval. It also locks very reliably because of this particular gate system, but a screw gate or a twist gate would be equally sufficient in my view. Now, if I know I'm going to be rappelling for a long, long time, I would be using something like a rappel rack that would not necessarily involve the carabiner in the first place, right? So I can load this and rappel on this without ever having to introduce rope to the carabiner, because putting the rope through the carabiner for several rappels is going to wear it down, even if it's steel. So if I know that I'm going to be doing rappels, I'll take something like a triple locking carabiner, because that means this stays on my harness and I can load and unload the device without having to touch this carabiner. So there's a much smaller chance of anything happening to it because I never have to touch it, just put it on the one time. A single locking, just a screw gate would also be fine, but this is my preference. For ascenders, your personal attachment, your attachment to the bottom with your foot loop or your aider or whatever it is that you're using. There's a zillion reasons you might attach something to this. You might be using it to haul. So this is really up to you. Use your judgment. But if you're gonna use a carabiner up top as a means of, say, setting up a mechanical advantage for when you're ascending, so there's your progress capture. So you're using a gree for progress capture. You can run the rope back up to this oval and then pull down instead of pulling up. Separate video going to be on this channel for that specific example. But what's nice about ovals is they rotate really freely within an ascender. And if you find yourself in a sticky situation and you need to get the ascender off quickly or move it to something else, like you're hauling or you're pulling up one of your climbing friends, or you're ascending the rope and you see something start to go awry. I mean, there's a million reasons you might want to take it off, but it's nice as opposed to trying to use something like this little offset D where you can't turn it around because of the wide hole in the top of the ascender. An oval is really nice because it allows you to rotate it freely and remove it easily if things get hairy. You can pop it out really quickly. Again, an oval's mostly nice just because it moves so well in the ascender itself. If I'm going to be rappelling and belaying on a rope that's going to accept 2 devices, I really like a steel oval because you get the increased durability, increased hardness without having to compromise on having like an offset steel D or something, where I can still belay very smoothly and uniformly because the ropes will be traveling on either side. A steel HMS might be better for this, but I only have the steel oval. But the tubular belay device allows for really quality rappelling, and the steel carabiner itself means that I don't have to worry about excessive wear on the rappel carabiner. So I'm going to have a separate video on this little kit here in its entirety. It includes this. Some people call this, I call it a rescue kit. Some people call it an oh shit kit or emergency kit. There's a bunch of stuff, but mostly I always try and keep at least one HMS carabiner on me all the time, and then these 2 sort of semi-locking carabiners that never serve as a really fundamental life-bearing piece, but are good for like tying a friction hitch or just keeping an extra knife. But this stays on the harness all the time, and these carabiners and this whole setup we'll go into in more depth in another video. In hindsight, I should have done this with the cams, but the carabiners I like to rack my nuts on are obviously non-locking, but key lock. So this is kind of, some people prefer to use hook nose carabiners for the reason that it can occur that on a key lock carabiner all the nuts just slide off, whereas on a hook nose carabiner one will typically get caught right there and then the rest just bunch up on it. But for me personally, I prefer to not have to struggle with sliding nuts off, and using a key lock is worth it, at least to me. People have, this is not a universally shared opinion. If I'm going to be using a pre-made anchor, I'll typically take something, if I'm taking something like a pre-built quad, especially on like a hard sport route, or if I know that there's going to be some bolted belays on hard climbing, and I want to keep weight down to the degree that I can, I'll take something like a Dyneema sling with these 2 very lightweight non-locking carabiners that have a very low profile nose, so they're not likely to get hung on anything, and the whole operation weighs like as much as this carabiner itself. Again, mostly really just for bolted belays, because if I know that they're going to be hanging nice and pretty away from the rock, I'm perfectly fine with non-locking carabiners personally. And then lastly, because this is getting kind of obscure, if I'm using a pulley, it is advantageous to have an HMS or an oval carabiner especially to use as the anchor carabiner. So you've got another place for carabiners down here, and you might have stuff hanging off other sides. but this means that the pulley itself is always loaded in the middle as opposed to off to the side, or if it can be at an angle. And this just means that the carabiner will always be keeping the pulley in line with whatever it is you're hauling, and especially on big walls where you've got 20 or more pitches, that tiny bit of drag of the haul cord or haul rope running over the edge here will save you some sweat in the long run. The only other thing worth mentioning is it can be advisable to just have 2 or just maybe even 1 non-locking carabiners on your harness. If you're going especially into like an alpine situation where you might need to bail, you would ideally take more than 1 in a really serious alpine environment. But if you know that you're going to have to bail and the slings that you're rappelling off of might not be very good, it's always nice to have a little any sort of hard link. So it can be a little super lightweight non-locking carabiner like this, or it can be a quick link or anything, but it's always nice to have at least 1 bail beaner on you. And it's especially important to take a bail beaner if you're going on a sport route that you know you're going to have to lower off of, or that you suspect you're going to have to be lowered off of if it's too hard and there's nobody else in your party that can climb it and clean it. It's always good to